She found a recording on her husband's phone of a call he never made. On the recording, he said, "I killed her. Everything according to plan." I didn't notice the recording right away. My husband's phone was lying on the nightstand while he was in the shower. I only wanted to check the time, but accidentally tapped on the voice recorder icon. One of the recordings was made 3 days ago. I didn't remember him recording anything. I pressed play. "It's done," my husband's voice. "I killed her. Everything according to plan." My throat went dry. I rewound it, listened again. It was definitely him. But who had he killed? And what did, according to plan, mean? When he came out of the shower, I was sitting on the bed, clutching his phone. "Something wrong?" He looked at me calmly. I tried to hide the tremor in my voice. "Did you record anything on your voice recorder?" He frowned. "No." "Why?" I put the phone behind my back. "Nothing, just thought I saw something." I deleted the recording, but saved a copy to my own phone. The next morning, the news reported a missing woman. I stared at the screen, my heart constricting. A young woman. Missing for 3 days. I checked my husband's credit card. On the day she disappeared, he had paid at a cafe downtown. I couldn't breathe. I began watching him. He often went out in the evenings. I didn't ask where. One night, I followed him. He turned toward an old warehouse. Went inside. I waited a minute, then got out of the car and followed. Inside it was dark. Quiet. I took a step, and suddenly heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't have come." He stood in the shadows. This was a mistake. I had my phone in my pocket. The recording was already running. I pressed send and sent everything to the police. If he wasn't joking, why haven't they found the body yet? The recording haunted me for days after I first heard it. 3 simple sentences, spoken in my husband Mark's voice, that shattered the foundation of my life. "It's done. I killed her. Everything according to plan." Each night as he slept beside me, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who she was. I found myself studying his face in the mornings, searching for some sign of the monster that might lurk beneath the familiar features I'd loved for 5 years. Mark was a financial analyst, practical and methodical. He color-coded his socks and alphabetized the spice rack. His life ran on schedules and planning. I used to find his predictability comforting. Now it terrified me. What kind of man could plan a murder with the same precision he planned our monthly budget? 6 days after discovering the recording, I sat at our kitchen table scrolling through news reports on my laptop. The missing woman's name was Elaine Winters, 32, a paralegal at Hoffman and Keene, the same law firm that handled some of Mark's company's accounts. "More coffee?" Mark appeared beside me, pot in hand. I slammed the laptop closed. "No, I'm good." His eyes lingered on the screen. "Work stuff?" "Just browsing." I forced a smile. "Thinking about getting my mom something for her birthday." He kissed the top of my head, his lips warm against my hair. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Pattersons tonight." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could he be so normal? So calm. I wondered if this was how all murderers behaved, compartmentalizing, separating the horror of their actions from their everyday lives. That evening, I begged off dinner, claiming a migraine. Instead, I went through Mark's things while he was out. His desk drawers revealed nothing unusual. His browser history showed normal searches, sports scores, stock updates, home improvement tutorials. In our shared cloud storage, I found a folder titled EW Project that was empty except for a single document, a map of Mercer County with a red X marked near the old industrial district. My hands shook as I printed the map. The warehouse. It had to be connected. I called Detective Rivera the next day. We'd spoken twice since I'd sent her the recording, but she remained non-committal about the investigation. "Mrs. Collins," she answered on the third ring, her voice professional but tired. "What can I do for you?" "I found something," I said, lowering my voice though I was alone in the house. "A map with a location marked. It's near that warehouse." "The warehouse where nothing was found," she reminded me. "You didn't search thoroughly enough." "Mrs. Collins," Detective Rivera's voice softened with what sounded like pity. "We brought in cadaver dogs. Ground-penetrating radar. There's no body there." "Then what was he doing there? What did he mean on that recording?" "People say things out of context all the time. Maybe it was for a video game, or a creative writing project." "Mark doesn't play video games. He doesn't write." "Has he given you any reason to suspect him? Any history of violence?" "No, but..." "Has he been acting strange? Nervous? Guilty?" I hesitated. The truth was, apart from the recording and his visits to the warehouse, Mark had been exactly the same as always, attentive, organized, loving in his quiet way. "No," I admitted. "Mrs. Collins, Sarah, I think you might want to consider talking to someone about these concerns. Sometimes anxiety can make us see patterns that aren't there." Her dismissal stung. "You think I'm imagining this?" I heard him confess to murder. "We're keeping the case open," she assured me. "But without evidence." I hung up, fuming. If the police wouldn't help, I'd find the truth myself. That night at dinner, I studied Mark across our dining table. He'd made pasta primavera, my favorite, and brought home a bottle of Pinot Grigio. The domesticity of it all felt surreal against the backdrop of my suspicions. "You've been quiet lately," he noted, refilling my wine glass. "Everything okay?" I took a sip, using the moment to compose myself. "Do you know anyone named Elaine Winters?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Elaine Winters?" He repeated the name slowly, as if testing it on his tongue. "I don't think so. Should I?" "She's the paralegal who's missing. It's been all over the news." "Oh, right." He resumed eating. "No, don't know her. Though I think she might work at Hoffman and Keene. That's our law firm, isn't it?" My heart raced. He just confirmed a connection. "Yes, it is." "Terrible thing," he said, shaking his head. "They're saying she might have just taken off, though. No signs of foul play." "How do you know that?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Mark looked up, surprised. "It was in the Tribune yesterday. Front page." Of course it was. I'd read the same article. "Mark," I said carefully, setting down my wine glass. "Where do you go in the evening sometimes?" "What do you mean?" "You go out. You don't say where." I just wondered. He set down his fork and studied me. "Sarah, what's this about?" "Nothing. Just curious. I've been helping Kevin with his basement renovation. I told you that weeks ago." Had he? I couldn't remember. Everything before the recording seemed hazy now, like memories from someone else's life. "I could come with you sometime," I suggested. "I haven't seen Kevin and Lisa in ages." A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed his face. "Sure, if you want. But it's just hammering and sawing. Not very exciting." I nodded and finished my wine in one long swallow. Kevin and Lisa Patterson had been our friends for years. They lived across town in a Tudor-style house with a perpetually unfinished basement. Mark's explanation was perfectly reasonable. So why didn't I believe him? The next day, I called Kevin. "Hey Sarah," he answered, surprised. "What's up?" Just checking in, I said, trying to sound casual. How's the basement coming along? The basement? He sounded confused. The renovation. With Mark. A pause. Oh, right. It's coming along, you know. Slowly. My grip tightened on the phone. When did you guys work on it last? Tuesday, I think. Yeah, Tuesday evening. Tuesday. The night I'd followed Mark to the warehouse. Thanks, Kevin. Maybe we'll stop by this weekend to check out the progress. Sure, he said too quickly. Anytime. I hung up, my suspicions confirmed. Kevin was lying for Mark. But why? That night, I looked through Mark's phone again while he was asleep. His call history showed regular calls to Kevin, but also to a number labeled only as EW Project. The same initials as the folder on our cloud drive. The same initials as Elaine Winters. I copied the number and the next morning, from the safety of my office at the community college where I taught English literature, I called it. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. A woman's voice, professional and clipped. You've reached the office of Dr. Elizabeth Warren. Please leave a message. Elizabeth Warren. EW. Not Elaine Winters. I hung up without leaving a message, feeling foolish and relieved. But then a new thought struck me. Who was Dr. Elizabeth Warren, and why was Mark calling her? A quick internet search revealed she was a psychiatrist specializing in grief counseling and trauma therapy. Her office was downtown, not far from the cafe where Mark had used his credit card the day Elaine disappeared. I sat back in my chair, mind racing. Mark wasn't in therapy as far as I knew. We hadn't experienced any major traumas. Why would he be seeing a grief counselor? And why keep it secret? Unless he was feeling guilty about something. Or someone. That evening, I followed Mark again. This time, he didn't go to the warehouse but to a nondescript office building. I watched from across the street as he entered and, 45 minutes later, emerged looking tired. I was so engrossed in watching him that I didn't notice Detective Rivera until she tapped on my car window. I jumped, then reluctantly rolled it down. Mrs. Collins, she said, leaning down to peer into my car. Interesting hobby you've picked up. I'm not doing anything wrong. No, but stalking your husband isn't exactly healthy behavior. She glanced across the street. Do you know what building that is? I didn't answer. It houses several medical offices, including a psychiatrist named Dr. Warren. Your husband has been seeing her twice a week for the past month. She paused. We know because we've been watching him too. So you do suspect him. We investigate all leads, Mrs. Collins. But nothing about your husband's behavior suggests he's involved in Elaine Winters' disappearance. What about the recording? His visits to the warehouse. The warehouse belongs to his friend Kevin Patterson. They're converting it into a workshop space. As for the recording. She hesitated. We think it might have been taken out of context. What does that mean? It means people say things that sound incriminating when heard in isolation. She straightened up. Go home, Mrs. Collins. Talk to your husband. Ask him about Dr. Warren. I think you'll find there's a reasonable explanation. But I couldn't just go home and pretend everything was normal. Instead, I drove to Kevin and Lisa's house. Lisa answered the door, surprise registering on her face. Sarah. This is unexpected. I need to talk to Kevin, I said, pushing past her into the foyer. About the warehouse. He's not home, she said, her expression guarded. And I don't know anything about a warehouse. Lisa, please. I know something's going on. Mark has been acting strange, and there was this recording. What recording? Her face paled. On his phone. He said he killed someone. Lisa closed her eyes briefly. Oh, Sarah. What? What do you know? She took a deep breath. You should really talk to Mark about this. I'm asking you. She led me to the living room, gesturing for me to sit. It's not my place to tell you, but I can't let you go on thinking, she broke off. Mark hasn't been himself since the accident. What accident? My voice was barely a whisper. The one on Lakeside Drive. 3 months ago. She looked at me strangely. Don't you remember? I shook my head slowly. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah, Lisa said gently, you were in the car. With Emma. Emma. The name sent a jolt through me, though I couldn't place why. Who's Emma? Lisa's eyes widened in shock. Your daughter. A strange ringing started in my ears. I don't have a daughter. Lisa reached for her phone. I'm calling Mark. And Dr. Warren. The psychiatrist. My head was spinning. Why would you call her? Because she's your doctor, Sarah. You've been seeing her since the accident. The accident that killed Emma. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That's not possible. I would remember having a child. I would remember her dying. That's just it, Lisa said softly. You don't. The trauma was too much. You've blocked it all out. I stood up, backing away. You're lying. This is some trick Mark put you up to. Sarah, please. Let me call Mark. He can explain everything. But I was already running for the door. I drove blindly, my vision blurred with tears I didn't understand. Eventually, I found myself at the old warehouse. It was unlocked. Inside, the cavernous space was mostly empty except for a corner that had been finished with drywall and flooring. There was a workbench, tools, building materials, and a large wooden chest. My hands trembled as I approached it. This was where he'd hidden her. It had to be. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside were photo albums, stuffed animals, a small pink backpack, and framed pictures. I lifted one out. It showed Mark and me, and between us, a little girl with my eyes and his smile. She looked about 6 years old. Her name was Emma. Mark's voice came from behind me. She was 7 when she died. I whirled around. He stood in the doorway, his face etched with sadness. This isn't real, I whispered. We don't have a daughter. We did, he said quietly. For 7 beautiful years. No. I would remember. You did, at first. You were devastated. We both were. But then your mind, it started protecting you. You began forgetting things. First little details about her, then bigger things, until one day you woke up and didn't remember her at all. That's not possible. Dr. Warren says it's a form of dissociative amnesia. Your brain couldn't handle the grief. And the recording? You said you killed someone. Mark closed his eyes briefly. It was from a session with Dr. Warren. She was helping me work through my guilt about the accident. I was driving, Sarah. A role-playing exercise, where I confronted what happened. He swallowed hard. I killed her. Our Emma. Not literally, not intentionally, but I was driving. So what is this place? Why do you come here? It's a memorial. I couldn't keep her things at home. You'd get upset when you saw them, then confused because you couldn't remember why they upset you. Kevin helped me set up this space. Somewhere I could come to remember her. I sank to my knees beside the chest. Why didn't you tell me? I've tried. So many times. But Dr. Warren said forcing memories could make your condition worse. She thought you needed to remember on your own, when your mind was ready. And Elaine Winters? The missing woman? I don't know her, Sarah. I've never met her. But the map, with the X. It marked this warehouse. I was planning to build a proper memorial for Emma here. A garden maybe. I looked down at the photo in my hands. The little girl, Emma, was laughing, her front tooth missing. Something stirred in my memory. A tiny tooth under a pillow. A note from the tooth fairy written in my handwriting, but signed with a glittery crown. She lost her tooth, I whispered. Her first one. She was so proud. Mark's face lit up. You remember? More fragments came rushing back. A purple bicycle with tassels on the handlebars. Bedtime stories about brave princesses. A voice calling me Mommy in the darkness after a nightmare. She was real. Tears streamed down my face. She was real, and I forgot her. Mark knelt beside me, gathering me into his arms. But now you're remembering. The sound of footsteps made us both look up. Detective Rivera stood in the doorway, her expression somber. Mr. Collins called me, she explained. He was worried about you. I clutched the photo to my chest. Did you know? About Emma? She nodded slowly. We looked into your husband after you sent us the recording. We discovered the accident report, spoke to Dr. Warren. And Elaine Winters? Is she still missing? Yes. But we have leads in a different direction. A former boyfriend with a history of stalking. So it was never Mark. It seems not. She hesitated. Mrs. Collins, Dr. Warren is outside. She'd like to speak with you, if you're willing. I looked up at Mark, then back at the chest full of memories I didn't fully recognize yet. I think I need to remember first. Really remember. Mark helped me to my feet, his arm steady around my waist. We can do it together. As we walked toward the exit, I glanced back at the memorial he'd created for our daughter. A place of remembrance, not concealment. A place of love, not horror. But one question still nagged at me, persistent despite everything I'd learned: if he hadn't killed Elaine Winters, who had? And would they ever find her body? The case remained open. Just like the wounds in my memory, slowly healing, but never fully closed.